Would you condemn a complete stranger to death? Welcome, my mere mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. My name is Kyrin, host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but I also do this one where we dive deeper into the books that we are reading to get out the juicy information that's contained within, look at some of the themes, and give you an overall idea of what I've been reading. Now, apart from my very terrible French accent, we do have for you today The Stranger by Albert Camus. So this was published in 1942, and it's relatively thin, about 120 pages, not big type font, so take you 2 to 3 hours to probably get through in total. And it's basically an account from a man who lacks normal feelings, is how I'd put it. So it's set in Algiers, and we follow the Frenchman Monsieur Meursault as he attends his maman's funeral, his mum's funerals, where the book kicks off. And then we go through a kind of series of stages of his life over the next month or so, I'd guess, where we see that he interacts with this girl, Marie, starts a little courtship with her. Also, his living conditions, how he lives, the type of tenants that he lives around with them. So there's this old man with a dog. There's this crazy guy down the hall. And eventually it takes like a turn for the worse as he goes on a trip and ends up murdering a man. We then follow his trial and sentencing, and I guess his just thoughts on life and how he views things. So it's really a look inside of the mind of someone. So we do see his innermost thoughts and of someone who is kind of emotionless in many ways, but we'll get onto that shortly. So about the author in this work in particular, it's split into 2 parts. So there is part 1, which is most of what I was telling you there leading up to the killing. And then the part 2 is more of his sentencing, of the trial that's taking place and lawyers arguing back and forth and things like that. And it's a first-person account, but it feels like a narrator somewhat due to the indifference that is shown. So it's you kind of get this weird mix between the two. Now, in terms of the author himself, Albert Camus, we've reviewed a couple of his books on this channel before. So these are things like The Plague, which this was actually hinted at in The Plague. It's kind of like a story within a story type thing. And The Myth of Sisyphus, which was actually published in the very same year as this. So looking at those ideas of absurdism and whatnot, although I wouldn't say it's as apparent in this book as is in some of his others. We're going to go on to the main theme, the one theme that I really took from this, which was applying justice, apathy versus indifference. So what the hell do those things mean? I'm going to give you some definitions. Now, the definitions of both these words, apathy and indifference, they're pretty similar. So you'll hear things like uncaring attitude, lack of interest, absence of feeling. So we get this real idea like, okay, it's when you're using it to describe a person, it's someone who is relatively emotionless. Now, I suppose how I kind of saw the difference between these two is apathy is more of a condition. So it's something that can't be changed, whereas indifference is somewhat of a choice. And this actually makes a big difference when it comes to applying justice and looking at laws and things like this. So we'll just keep that in mind at this start point, and we'll touch more upon that soon. So Monsieur Meursault, there's a lot of examples in this book where we really see his, I suppose, well, either apathy or indifference. It's at this stage, which is just establishing, okay, yeah, he kind of lacks his feelings, and we see it on the very first page. So the very first words, Maman died today, or yesterday maybe, I don't know. I got a telegram from the home, mother deceased, funeral tomorrow, faithfully yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. So we kind of see right at the very start, we establish, oh, okay, he's not a normal person. And whilst I was reading these first few pages, I was definitely going like, oh man, it's kind of weird. There's a weird book. And we can see also when we jump to page 21, so this is where he's finished the funeral and he's kind of now gone home. And this is where we see he kind of gets bored and he just doesn't like people, I guess. So When I woke up, Marie had gone. She'd explained to me that she'd gone to her aunt's. I remembered that it was Sunday, and that bothered me. I don't like Sundays. So I rolled over and tried to find the salty smell Marie's hair had left on the pillow and slept until 10. Then I smoked a few cigarettes, still in bed till noon. I didn't feel like having lunch at Celeste's like I usually did because they'd be sure to ask questions, and I don't like that. I fixed myself some eggs and ate them out of the pan, without bread, because I didn't have any left, and I didn't feel like going downstairs to buy some. After lunch, I was a little bored, and I wandered around the apartment. So that is definitely the actions of a person who is not too interested in, I suppose, anything per se. He's very kind of come with you go. There's almost a persistent uncaring that comes out throughout the book, and you can see this where he doesn't throw too many moral judgments on. There's this neighbor who's very abusive to his dog and hates his dog. He doesn't really care about it. There's this other neighbor who has this mistress and is beating her or wants to beat her, and he's kind of just like, yeah, whatever. it's and his indifference is noted throughout by many people in the book, and some people like it, some people don't. Now, there's also the flip side of this, which is okay. Well, we see that he has it, but does this mean that he can't feel at all? Is this a choice, or is this something that he was kind of born with internally? Like, is there some switches in his brain that are just not connected in the normal way, in the way that most humans have? I'm not so sure of this, because we can see that he understands. It's not a lack of understanding in many parts. So, for example, he knew why his boss disapproved of his 4-day weekend. So he needed 2 days off to travel to his mum's funeral on a Thursday, return home on a Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday are obviously the weekend. And he kind of understood this. And we also see many times throughout the book that it's not that he lacks emotions, even though he is rather emotionless. And so I'm going to read here from page 59. So this is right before the end of part 1. And this is where it's the actual scene where he is murdering or killing this Arab guy who was chasing after his friend because his friend beat his mistress, who was this guy's sister. So kind of complicated series of events. But we go here. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped over my eyelids all at once and covered them with a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead, and indistinctly the dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed at my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. So there's definitely feeling in here, and we do see in multiple instances in the book where he expresses joy at things. Like he loved having sex with Marie. He disliked other things. So there are definitely points right at the end, for example, he gets extremely angry at the priest who has come in to give him his kind of final rites. And so there's definitely, he can definitely feel. It's not like he's an emotionless robot at all. There is feelings in there. So now we have to go, okay, all right, is it apathy or indifference? And how do we decide what's happened? Because there is no doubt in anyone's mind that he killed a man, and he confesses to it himself. He says, yes, this is what happened. So then it's deciding, okay, is he guilty of killing a man? Yes, that's for sure. What happens next? What should happen? So we look at the trial, and basically it's the normal kind of court system of arguing back and forth. There's a prosecutor and there's a defender. The prosecutor is making a lot of cases as to showing his indifference and why he is a kind of cruel, emotionless man. And, there's some pretty good arguments for that. And his defense is relatively weak, to be honest, because he's confessed to everything. He said, yeah, I did it. And there's a couple circumstances related to, you killed him, and you did express these same things of where it was just like hot flashes of lights coming over him. He didn't really know what he was doing. Like, he didn't kill him out of rage or anger. There was no intent behind it, yet a man still died. And this is where it's, I guess, like, guessing at the motive starts to get a little bit icky, and we kind of see that where the prosecutor is coming up with all of these things and saying, you know, he did it for this reason and for this, and we can kind of see inside his mind, and they're guessing and guessing, and he's on the stand kind of bewildered, just going like, what? That's not how I see it. You know, that's not what I was feeling. And yeah, it's kind of hard. It's like, well, what do you do with this? Is how should we judge him? And probably you have to judge someone by the actions above all else, or at least this is how I kind of view life. And when we look at his actions, he went to the beach with his friends. They got into a fight. His friends went back, and one of them went to the hospital. He went out again with his other friend who had a gun, and his friend gave him the gun. So this is the second time he's gone back. They went back again, and then he went out once more on his own, and this is when he killed a guy. And so this is where you're starting to go like, okay, look, no matter if he intended to or not, right in that moment, you know, he still put himself in the situation where he knew he knew there was conflict. He knew there was going to be a guy here. You know, when you look at it that way, it's kind of like it doesn't matter if you're indifferent. It doesn't matter if you're uncaring. You still put yourself in a situation where things could go wrong, and voluntarily put himself in that situation. It's not like he was compelled. I suppose so. You could say that his reasoning beforehand for going to the beach was like he felt hot and uncomfortable, and so he needed to go to the beach. He knew he shouldn't have taken steps forward, but he still did, and this is what escalated the conflict. I don't know. I have little sympathy for someone who puts themselves in situations where they kind of knowingly know that things could be going bad, even if it didn't turn out the way you wanted and there was no particular intent behind it. There was a kind of a new idea, which I actually thought was kind of cool on applying justice in this case, which is there was kind of no contest. He was going to be charged as killing this man, and the death sentence in Algiers, I guess, in this time was in effect. So he got the death sentence. And there was one, he was kind of contemplating this. This is Monsieur Meursault. And one of the things that he was saying was he felt it was unfair. He felt it wasn't reasonable. And so this is one of the ideas that I thought was kind of interesting. So he says, but naturally you can't always be reasonable. At other times, for instance, I would make up new laws. I would reform the penal code. I'd realize that the most important thing was to give the condemned man a chance. Even 1 in 1,000 was good enough to set things right. So it seemed to me that if you could come up with a mixture of chemicals that, if ingested by the patient, that's the word I use, patient, would kill him 9 times out of 10. But he would know this, that would be the one condition. For by giving it some hard thought, by considering the whole thing calmly, I could see that the trouble with the guillotine was that you had no chance at all, absolutely none. The fact that it had been decided once and for all that the patient was to die. It was an open and shut case, a fixed arrangement, a tacit agreement that there was no question of going back on. And he goes on talking about, okay, but he also understands why, you know, you need to have that certainty as well. But I thought that was an interesting idea. So say if you had a death penalty, and I don't advocate for this personally, but I think it's a very flawed system. But if you had a jury and each one of the jurors went, okay, you know, beyond reasonable doubt, yeah, I think that's you have to have a court system some way, and that's guilty beyond reasonable doubt. But what is the unreasonable doubt? Is it 1 in a million? So in that case, what if you got each one of the jurors to say what they thought the percent chance of him being not guilty were, and then, you know, summing them together, averaging it out and going, okay, yeah, this guy, his jury of peers who condemned him, they think there is a 1 in 565,000 chance that he's not guilty. What if we implement that into the actual machine of killing, and then that way he knows that he still has a chance. I think that's an interesting concept. I can see for many reasons why it wouldn't work. Who can you trust to actually put in the numbers? How can we verify this? How, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the off chance, when he does get lucky and it's like, oh, geez, now, and then he recommits a crime. Well, there's the people who have had the crime recommitted against them, they would not be pleased at that system, to say the least. So I just did think that was a kind of a cool idea that popped up in the book. So yeah, on the theme of applying justice, apathy versus indifference, I think it's obvious that he was lacking emotions, and by a jury of his peers, they condemned him, and I'd be more inclined to be condemning him as well and saying, even though there was kind of a lack of intent, I think there was enough things going on behind the scenes where you can say, okay, yes, he's a different person, but what are you going to do? You're just going to let him go free, just because he didn't want to? And how could you prove that he was feeling this apathy from a condition of birth, like it was internal to him, there's nothing he could change about it, versus an indifference where he chose not to feel guilty, or he chose not to feel those emotions. It's a difficult one. So I'm going to go now onto my own observations and takeaways. So I did have a very initial distaste of him and of the book, actually, but I think I gradually understood his robotic nature. I think that starts to peer out, and you go, oh, okay, I can start to see and understand this. And funnily enough, I think that's actually what makes him attractive to Marie, for example. He does have this kind of devil-may-care, I don't give a shit attitude, like, you don't mean anything to me, which, whilst in some ways you'd say is not an attractive quality, it can be, because it shows like a lack of value of her as a person. And this, funnily enough, for some people equates to, oh, he must, get all the women or something like that. So him showing me this discare, this like blasé attitude, proves that he's like a high value man. Let's not get into that too much, but I could understand him after a while. Whereas in the initial probably 15, 20 pages, I was going, man, this is just weird. I'm not digging this book. On page 76 and 77, I wanted to draw out something here. So this was in part 2. So this was, he was in his cell, or he's been in jail for a little bit now, and I think this kind of showcases how he was unlucky in many ways. So I'll read from here. As I imagine the sound of the first waves under my feet, and the relief and the sense of relief it would give me, all of a sudden I would feel just how closed in I was by the walls of my cell. So there's him imagining being a free man. But that only lasted a few months. Afterwards, my only thoughts were those of a prisoner. I waited for the daily walk, which I took in the courtyard, or for a visit from my lawyer. The rest of the time I managed pretty well. At the time, I often thought that if I had to live in the trunk of a dead tree with nothing to do but look up at the sky flowering overhead, little by little, I would have gotten used to it. And I think that kind of explains him to a T. He's kind of uncaring to the point where he's not really willing to make proactive decisions in his life. And if he does, they're more on a whim. It's like, I feel like eating now, I'm going to go eat. That kind of thing, rather than detailed, structured, forethought reasoning of, I'm going to be hungry in the future. I better buy some bread for tomorrow. And I'm not sure if I'll have money saved up at this point, so I might have to ask for a loan from my friend to be able to get, like that's not apparent in any of his thinking. And I think in a parallel world, he could have almost been a Buddha in many ways. He's got this acceptance of pain, of hardship, of joy. He treats them all somewhat the same. And whilst living is great and, feeling joy and things like that, some of the things that the Buddha says, or these kind of wise men, are like that these things are fleeting as well. Don't go chasing after happiness, because that is just a surefire way to not find happiness. So I do like to imagine, like, what would Monsieur Meursault have been like in the time of Jesus? Would he have had these same sort of things? And if things had been a little bit different, would he have like gained a cult following, and then this had kind of risen him to an elevated status? I could see it happening. One of the things I also don't try and do too much is read too far beyond what's written down. And as I was kind of doing some prep for this book, I was reading some other people's thoughts, and man, there was one comment where it was like, oh, to really explain this book, you'd have to have a full novel being able to explain it. And there's sometimes where this is the same thing I noticed with the justice and applying of it, where it's almost like you go too far beyond what's there. It's like, what was his reasoning for killing a man? Like, he didn't really have one. And that's not satisfying enough. So it's like, you need to go for more and go deeper and harder, and let's start using some abstract philosophy. And the gun is a representation of the penis, and there's so many ways that you can go into analyzing something. And for me, I sure, I like to dig a little bit beneath, but I don't go too deep beneath the surface. I think it's very easy to conflate things and just chuck on your own whatever into it. And so, with all of that being said, I feel pity for Monsieur Meursault. There was no intent behind him, but he couldn't also be free. There's no. I don't see this as a condemnation of the justice system or anything like that. I think what happened there, whilst I disagree with like the death penalty as a general principle, and for both ethical and kind of practical reasons, I didn't come out of this being like, oh, I need to dive deeper and to really examine absurdism or philosophy or anything like that. The last observation I had was just, why do certain works kind of speak to us? And I've noticed this for myself, and in particular with one of the people I've connected with on this channel was Nastia, who has an Instagram account, and she seems to, and books_I_read_daily. And the kind of books and things that we read are very similar. We've obviously got very similar tastes, and yet the things she likes and the things I like are just completely different. So the reason I read this was she recommended it and valued it highly, and it just seems to be a kind of flippening going on. I really like The Plague. She didn't like it that much. She loves this one. I'm kind of indifferent to it. The 1984, absolutely loved that book. She hated it. On the Road by Jack Kerouac, I know she really enjoyed it. For me, I was like, I'm not the biggest fan of him either. So, and yet as a whole, the books that we enjoy as a collective group seem to be pretty much bang on the money. And I don't know. There's just something about that where it's like, how can how can we enjoy the same things and yet have completely not completely opposed ideas, but strong enough oppositions to individual works? I don't know. What is it in a book that really brings it out? And is it the personal things that have happened in my life that I can, there's too much of a difference. I don't see enough of myself in Monsieur Meursault or something like that. Is that how it is? Or yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was funny. I like to think about these things. So in summary, I did find it a slow start, but became a bit more engaged by it as it went on. So I think it's really great book for highlighting almost like the reason why life is so hard sometimes. Everyone is a stranger, and some people are really strange as well. So it's just really highlighting, okay, there's different people out there, and how you treat these people and with regards to justice, or even just judging them in your normal everyday life or just general interactions. You have to have some kind of sympathy for that, and be willing to recognize that there are different people out in this world. Unfortunately, the Indifference was very contagious, and I didn't love the book in particular. So I'm going to give this book, The Stranger by Albert Camus, a very indifferent 6 out of 10. I hope you enjoy it. Some people I value highly and have similar taste to. I value this book very highly, but for me, yeah, it was okay. It was okay. So that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me to this part of the video. Have you read The Stranger? Do you think that the application of justice in this case was fair and balanced? Was Monsieur Meursault apathetic and in the sense that he had a condition that could not be fixed, or was it a choice on his part to be indifferent? I'd love to know all of these things. Best way to do that is to just leave a comment down below, and I always respond to them. And I also recommend checking out the Mere Mortals podcast, which is one that I do with my friend Juan, and I typically examine a lot of the ideas that come up in these books on that podcast as well. You can find us on the YouTube and whatnot, and I just would say, if you're enjoying it and want to tune into that, I would highly recommend doing that. And then also these are available in audio form. And so if you don't want to use YouTube for whatever reason, and you just want to see the pictures showing up on the screen and in the chapter art and whatnot, I'd recommend going to newpodcastapps.com, choosing one of the ones there: Podverse, Breeze, Fountain, Curocaster, Castomatic. They're all really good apps, and you can support the show in many more ways by going there and checking them out. So I really do hope you're having a fantastic, sunny, not indifferent day, wherever you are in the world. Kyrin out.